Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today to go over kind of how to prepare for ICE and for having people coming into our shared spaces and into our communities. I want to go over a couple of things today, but mostly I want to make sure that we all have times for questions so that we can get a full experience out of today. So our agenda for today will be going over an overview of the Department of Homeland Security. And then within each space, we kind of have three different types of people. We have employers, we have employees, and then we have bystanders. So I'll be talking about the rights and responsibilities that all of those groups have, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So the Department of Homeland Security was created on March 1st of 2003, and it was part of an overall reorganization of the federal government that was designed to centralize a lot of our public security work into a single federal agency. So the Department of Homeland Security has a very wide mandate. They're in charge of anti-terrorism, they're in charge of border control, cybersecurity, transportation security, maritime, investigation of weapons of mass destruction. And then, of course, importantly, they are all in charge of immigration as well. There are three primary groups within the Department of Homeland Security that work on immigration. And our first one is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. They are primarily a benefits agency, and they are contractors that work across the United States or that work in individual service centers, which are local offices, but they are primarily bureaucratic individuals that are not going out and doing any type of field work. USCIS is in charge of our non-immigrant benefits, our immigrant benefits, which are also green card holders, naturalization, which is the process of becoming a citizen, and then certain types of asylum and refugee applications in the US. The second group that we have is U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and they're broken down into kind of two primary units that deal with immigration. The first are Border Patrol, and they do have official uniforms. So green uniforms indicate that those are people who are patrolling along the land ports of entry. Sometimes they're in trucks, sometimes they're in ATVs, occasionally they are on horseback. But you can see over here, this is an example of the first type of kind of olive green uniform that you could see. Over here at the end, this brown uniform, those are Border Patrol agents who are responsible for air and maritime operations. And maritime operations have really picked up because of some stoppages of applications at the land port of entry that were put in place in January of 2025. So you can often see more Border Patrol agents out along our beaches and along our coastline because they're increasing in their maritime operations. And then Border Patrol, which are those middle blue officers in uniforms, they're in charge of our interior checkpoints and basically along our ports of entry. So if you're coming into the United States through San Ysidro, or if you're flying in through San Diego or LAX, those are the individuals that will be checking passports, making sure that people are entering the United States. CBP is also responsible for the entry and inspection of all peoples and goods, and then anti-terrorism organizations. So these are the standard uniforms of Border Patrol agents that you'll see. Many times they do have field responsibilities, or in the case of people who are along the border, they're entirely in the field. So you'll also see them fairly frequently in our communities. And then our last group is U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is also known as ICE. ICE has many divisions, but the two that are most out in the field are Department of the Homeland Security Investigations and then Enforcement and Removal Operations. So HSI is primarily sort of functions like the FBI of the Department of Homeland Security. They are primarily engaged in investigations, focusing on transnational crime, gang activity, financial trade crimes, human trafficking, human smuggling, drug smuggling, as well as investigation of like child pornography or crimes against children. And then ERO, or Enforcement and Removal Operations, they are in charge of the apprehension, detention, and removal of undocumented immigrants. So our detention facilities are typically private corporations, privately run prisons, but ERO plays a role in detecting people, transporting them to those detention facilities, and then facilitating their removal outside of the United States. Traditionally, ICE has never had official uniforms. What I've put up here on the screen are what they typically look like, and it just shows somebody who has maybe police and then HSI or ERO, but there is no traditional standard uniform of ICE officers. That has kind of become a little bit of a challenge now because we have more ICE presence in our communities, but because they're not in standard uniforms, it can be a little difficult to identify people. So currently, most are wearing either plain clothes, they may have a black bulletproof vest, sometimes under their clothing, so it just seems a little bulky, or they're wearing khaki uniforms that really look like a military style uniform. They'll have vests, jackets, or patches that may say police, or oftentimes they will just be in plain clothes. And most of the time, right now, due to security concerns, they have masks or neck gaithers, which are those old gaithers that you pull up over your nose, if anyone remembers the early days of COVID. They may be carrying firearms, radios, handcuffs, other types of things that you would associate with police. They may display a badge or an ID, and anyone has the right to ask to see a badge or ID, but that can be an order that is kind of routinely being ignored, maybe because of the tense nature of the encounter. And they're likely to be in unmarked cars. ICE agents are not required to have sirens, emergency lights, or any type of insignia. So this is what ICE officers can look like today. These are just some pictures from some standard events. Some of these were very high profile events. So you'll see, down here, people maybe look a little bit more militarized than you would expect. But these are typically taken outside of detention facilities or spaces where individuals are being detained. And then this is also what ICE looks like today. These are some pictures that were taken from standard hallways. This picture up here with the gentleman in the red flannel, that was taken outside of the Seattle Immigration Court. And then, other individuals, they're coming in, you can see with hoodies, with the neck gaithers, or they're just wearing plain clothing. So our focus today is really to talk about employers and how we want to prepare for ICE encounters when they're coming into our employment spaces. So it's important to know that ICE can enter any area that is available to the public, and they do not need a warrant to enter that area. They still need to follow the Fourth Amendment should they want to detain individuals or investigate individuals, which requires probable cause. But any area of your business that is open to the public, ICE can enter and they do not have to produce a warrant in order to do so. ICE also has the power to detain people. Sometimes ICE is coming into your space because they have someone who's already in removal proceedings and their ability to be out in the public is being revoked. So instead of having their removal proceedings done as a non-detained individual, they're taking that person into detention so they can complete their removal proceedings. In that instance, ICE typically would have a warrant for that person. And there's kind of two different types of warrants that we'll look at. But ICE also has the ability to take collateral arrests. And a collateral arrest is when they say that they have probable cause to investigate other people in the area. And probable cause can be that there were other undocumented people in the area. And then they're able to take somebody into custody if they're not able to determine whether they're in the country legally. And yes, Austin, we are going to talk about how to make spaces private because you are correct. If there is a private space in your business, ICE is not permitted to come in without your permission or without a warrant. That's a great question, and we will definitely be talking about it. ICE can also enter into your space to prepare for an I-9 audit. So the Form I-9 was created in 1986 as part of the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which is also known as IRCA. And it requires employees to document that they have work authorization inside the United States and confirm their identity. The employer obligation is that for everyone on payroll, and then as well for some individuals who have terminated employment, you're required to maintain I-9 records, and ICE can come in and request those records. When they're coming in for an I-9 audit, it's typically just a contractor coming in like a polo shirt with a windbreaker, presenting a written request for documents, and then those documents are returned either in paper or electronically. But arising from those I-9 audits is an increase in workplace raids. So once ICE has looked at your I-9s, if they have determined that there are people who are working there who are not properly documented, or if they have concerns that the employer is not properly following through with their I-9 obligations, ICE can enter as part of a workplace raid. And that is very specifically for an investigation and detention. In that case, they will typically have a judicial warrant, although again, they can access publicly available spaces without a warrant. But many of the very high profile incidents that have happened, which includes the raid here in San Diego on Buena Forchetta, was part of a workplace raid that arose from an I-9 audit. And in that raid, they did have a judicial warrant that was signed, which allowed them to access all sorts of places at the business, take copies of laptops, take access of electronic devices of the owner, and then also for safety reasons to detain all employees while they were completing the investigation. Oh, sorry, one moment. There we go. So there's two types of warrants that typically ICE is working with. The first is called an administrative warrant, and this is a formal written document, but it's coming directly from a federal agency to make an arrest or seizure. So ICE has specific forms that they use that they issue to themselves. So they're not going through necessarily a Article 3 judge, a judge that they're under Article 3 of the Constitution, but they're going through an executive agency. So it may say signed by an immigration judge. An immigration judge is a federal bureaucrat who is appointed by the Department of Justice, or an immigration officer. And an immigration officer can also include just the ICE officer who's actually making the detention. Administrative warrants do not authorize a search or access to non-public entries. But if they have an administrative warrant, say for Katie Spero, and then when they find Katie Spero, Candace Moon is sitting next to her, and they determine that Candace Moon is in the country unlawfully, they can make a collateral arrest of Candace Moon without a warrant. Typically, once Candace Moon has been detained, then an administrative warrant would be issued for her just to complete the sort of chain of documentation. A judicial warrant is issued by a court, by a judicial court, and they can be issued by, state courts like the Superior Court of California or a federal district court, and they're going to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. You can largely ignore an administrative warrant unless you are the person who is being detained on it. But you have to comply with a judicial warrant. There are significant consequences for failing to comply with a judicial warrant. So it's important for us to know what those two warrant types kind of look like and what the powers are so that we can help determine what they are. Over here on the left-hand side of my screen, and I'll circle it just to make sure, this is what an administrative warrant looks like. And then you can tell this is an older one because it refers to the Immigration and Naturalization Service. But it's going to have a form box on it. Potentially, it's going to have some branding or some logos on it that indicate that it's from the Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security. It's going to look like a form with check boxes, with signatures on it, and maybe even a form number at the bottom, which has an expiration date and what's called a control number. This other page is a search and seizure warrant, and this is a formal warrant. It looks very similar. There's also check boxes. There's also some branding and some logos. So you want to look and see who signed it. Is this coming from a district court or a state court, or is this coming from an agency? If it's coming from an agency, it's an administrative warrant. If it's coming from a court, a district court or a state court, it's more likely a judicial warrant. So there are some things that you can do to kind of prepare for the encounters that you may be seeing in the community. And since January of 2025, we have seen an increase in I-9 audits. And as a result of increases in I-9 audits, we're also seeing increases in workplace rates because those two events are often tied together. One thing you can do is conduct an internal audit for I-9 compliance, because if you are successful with your I-9 audit, the chances of you having a workplace raid are greatly reduced. You want to go through and look at any employee who was hired after November 1986. You need to have an I-9 on file for them if they are still currently on payroll. So you want to pull your payroll records, identify any missing forms, and see if it makes sense to have those late prepared. You want to review and correct any existing forms, and then you want to schedule your purge dates. So if an employee has been with you for less than 2 years, when they terminate, you're going to pull up their I-9. You're going to look and see what it says the first date of employment was, and then you schedule your purge date 3 years from that first date of employment. If your employee has been with you for over 2 years, your purge date is going to be 1 year from their last day of compensation. And then you can consider E-Verify. E-Verify is an automated system that is free to use that allows you to verify the work authorization of your employees. It does provide what's called a safe harbor. So if you are complying with E-Verify, the government should respect that and give you more deference in any type of I-9 errors that do occur. I do want to note, however, that in the large workplace raid that was just conducted in Omaha, that employer was on E-Verify, and he was given some communication that E-Verify is no longer serving as a safe harbor to provide protections for employers. That's a one-time isolated, like hearsay kind of event, but it is a fact that he was an E-Verified employer, and they still conducted a workplace raid on that facility. You also want to make sure that you're completing training for your staff, because they need to be prepared about how to handle any type of government presence within the building. So what I recommend is that you designate a rapid response tree and you set up just an old school style phone tree where you have everybody's cell phone numbers or contact information, when they're going to be available, and that you designate a team that would be contacted if you have a significant ICE event. And how you define that may be very different within each of your businesses. You want to prepare a written raid protocol that has specific instructions for staff to follow, so that when they come in, because people are going to be, panicked and a little nervous at the beginning, if they have something in a simple written instruction plan to follow, they're more likely to handle the situation calmly and be able to assist with making sure that that's a pretty low stress event for any type of patrons and help protect employees as well. You want to practice, just like a fire drill, you want to run mock raid scenarios so people get a little used to what that looks like. And then you may want to also connect with local immigration networks or other local businesses. Many local businesses right now are sharing information about when ICE is coming into certain neighborhoods, so that you can be aware that today might be a day where a raid is more likely. You can also connect with local immigration networks. There are rapid response immigration groups, and there's information being shared on social media. People are utilizing Ring cameras and other types of personal surveillance devices to help assist with identifying when ICE is coming into the area. You also want to make sure that each shift has a person who is assigned to interact with ICE. And that could be just a specific position so that it's always very consistent about who's going to be in charge when ICE comes in. They're going to take the lead in terms of talking and interacting with the officers that come in. And then to Austin's point, you want to make sure that you clearly indicate private areas within the business. So that could be various different things. It could be signage that says, private property, do not enter. It could be doors closed and locked. It could also be a visitor policy in place that limits access without permission. So there are going to be places in your business that are considered to be public, even if you have a sign outside that says private property. Because if I can just come in as an individual and as a patron, sit at the bar, order a beer, even if it says outside private property, you're still allowing me to come in. That's kind of the face of the business. But if I'm sitting there at the bar and there's a sign to the brewery floor that says, private property or private area, no visitors allowed, I can't go back into that space within your business. Similarly, you can make those kinds of markings for a kitchen, for an employee break room or area, for your private offices, but you do want to have a very consistent approach to that. Make sure that there's a visitor policy that limits access. So if your brewer still wants to bring his friends to the back, he can still do so, but you're going to need to have a policy in place that's pretty strictly focused. Within our office, because I work at an immigration law firm, our doors are locked for the outside, but not the inside. So if I need to get out in the case of a fire, I don't have to have a key, but in order to get back in, I do. And that was a choice that we made just to protect our privacy and the client privacy that we have. But we're a closed facility. If you're an open facility within hospitality, where you're inviting people into the space, almost all your business could be considered to be public. So think very carefully about how you want to designate more private areas. You want to train all your workers on warrants and train them that they're not allowed to allow ICE into those private areas without a judicial warrant. And typically what people want to say are things like, you're not allowed to enter, please speak with my employer. Or this is a private area, you cannot enter without a judicial warrant that's signed by a judge. Do you have a judicial warrant? So you want to just be, state the action. You cannot come in. This is a private area. And then state what needs to happen for them to have access. Do they need to speak with someone? Do they need to present a certain document? So you want to make sure you're combining those two statements so that it's clear to the officer that you're complying, but it's also clear to the officer that you understand the rights that you have. You want to train your workers on how to stay calm. Do not run for the exits. It will absolutely make things worse. It will make it worse for everybody who's remaining, and it will open up a potential obstruction charge to the person who's left. You do not have to confirm if someone is at work or show them where the worker is if they only serve an administrative warrant. So if they come in and they say, is Katie Spero working today? And you say, I'm not going to tell you that information. And they say, well, we have a warrant. If it's just an administrative warrant, you can still say, I'm not going to tell you that information. You don't have to call Katie Spero up to the front, and you don't have to walk them over to where I'm working. If they do have a judicial warrant, then that is required. You can indicate that someone is working, and you should sort of indicate where the area of their working is, or say, I'm going to go and get them and bring them up to the front, or I'll meet you around back with this individual to try to get people out of your spaces. One thing that ICE has been doing recently as well is when they come into a space, they ask employees to sort themselves by immigration status or by country. So they will say, okay, all Americans stand over to the right. Everybody not born in America stand over to the left. You do not have to do that under any circumstances, warrant or no warrant. And I really recommend that you instruct people to not make those kind of sorting designations, especially when the language is very casual. For example, my husband was born in Germany on a military base. He would put himself over to the left because he was not born in this country, but he is an American citizen. If you just ask him where he was born and he says Germany, he would have a chance of being detained. And you also want to train your workers on how to video interactions. You have the right to record police and law enforcement, but you don't have the right to obstruct their activities. Oftentimes, obstructing activities is something that's kind of being taken fairly broadly right now. Definitely do not touch the person that they're trying to detain. So a lot of the kind of high profile detentions that have happened, I had a photo up earlier about the comptroller in New York who had been detained by ICE outside of immigration court. He had linked arms with the individual that they were trying to detain, and that is very much going to be seen as obstruction. But if you are videotaping in a public area, you have the right to do so. They may tell you you don't have the right to do so, and that's common. That's common with all kinds of police officers, but you do. If they tell you to step back, step back. If they tell you that they're going into a private area, you can stop recording. The things that you want to record are badge numbers, the officer who's taking the person into custody, what they're wearing, the license plate of the people who are being taken. You can also say things to the people who are being taken into custody, and that's not considered to be obstruction. And we'll talk a little bit later about that in our section in regards to bystanders. Right. I want to take a quick moment to break and see if anybody had any questions they wanted to put in the chat. I'll go ahead and move on to employees, but if any questions come up, I'm happy to answer them. So employees, I think what's important for them to know is just what is the scope of federal law. So federal law allows for the deportation of anyone in the United States who does not have a lawful immigration status. That means that could be people who entered without inspection or without permission. So that could also be people who entered with inspection or with fraudulent documents, for example. It could also be people who have overstayed their status. And in the media, this gets referred to as visa overstay, but visa overstay isn't the proper term. A visa stamp is something that's issued in your passport at a U.S. embassy abroad, and it's screen printed into your passport, and it's a travel document only. It allows you to come to the United States and ask to be admitted in that status. And then when you come into the United States as a non-immigrant, you're going to receive a document that's called an I-94 card. Before 2013, those were physical documents that you filled out at customs or you filled out at the port of entry. But since 2013, it's an automated service. So it's just it's completely done electronically once you've entered the United States and been granted entry. And a visa can be valid for a very long period of time. For example, if you're from Mexico, you will have a 10-year visa to come into the United States. But when you enter, that doesn't mean you're allowed to stay here for 10 years. Your I-94 card only grants you a period of 6 months. And you could overstay that I-94 card if you have timely filed to extend your status or to change over to a different status. So say you come here as a tourist, you get admitted to school, and then you want to transition to an F1 student. That's the type of thing that could happen. We do also have permanent statuses or people who have entered lawfully who could do something to lose that lawful immigration status. Green card holders, refugees, asylees, and non-immigrants can commit certain crimes which would result in them losing their lawful immigration status. The lack of lawful immigration status in the United States is a civil violation. And we have a line of court cases that say deportation is not a criminal penalty. They don't consider it to be a penalty at all. It is a civil action to a civil violation. Despite that, we still are apprehending people and putting them in detention facilities in a way that feels like a criminal response, but it is still civil violations, civil detentions, and civil penalties. So ICE can stop you when you're in public or while you're at work, which is also fairly much considered to be in public. And you have a lot of rights when ICE comes and stops you. You have the right to remain silent, and you also have the ability to say, I'm not going to speak with you unless I have an attorney present. Everybody has a Sixth Amendment right to an attorney, but because this is a civil violation, you don't have the right to have a government attorney appointed to you and paid for, but you still can retain your own counsel. So you have the ability to say, I would like to speak with a lawyer. You also have the right to confirm whether you're being detained. And you have that right, of course, with all types of law enforcement. You can say, am I free to go? Am I being detained? If you are free to go, you can go. I have had officers say things like, you're free to go, but if you do, it will be much worse. Focus on the you are free to go, because that allows you to leave. So listen carefully. Sometimes the answer that will be given is designed to make you agree to stay, but listen carefully to what's being said by the officer. You have the right to deny a search. You still have to, the government still has to comply with the Fourth Amendment in regards to having a search or seizure without permission. And then, of course, do not run away. Ask, am I free to go? Ask if I'm being detained. If you run, now you are in a position where there is probable cause to arrest you and detain you just based on that. If ICE comes to your home, you have more protections. Our recommendation is that you do not open. They will say, I have a warrant. You can ask to see the warrant, but if you open your door to receive the warrant, they can then at that point in time use that to come into your space and kind of push their way in. You can refuse even with a judicial warrant. I was saying this to Candace when we were preparing for the presentation today. If they have a judicial warrant, they will break your door down. They do not need your permission to enter. So if you don't even want to go through the process of figuring out if a warrant is needed, you can always say no. You again have the right to remain silent and the right to ask to speak with your attorney. And then, of course, we always recommend do not sign anything. ICE will often use, subterfuge, just like a regular police officer will. They may say, if you want to see your lawyer, you need to sign this piece of paper. That is not the case. They may say, if you want, we'll release you if you sign this piece of paper. Sometimes they're releasing you in order to be deported. So if you are going to sign anything, make sure that you carefully read it and understand what it says. But you can also just say, I'm not going to sign anything without a lawyer reviewing it. Currently, a big question that we're receiving is whether somebody needs to carry their documents with them. In 1940, the US passed something called the Alien Registration Act, and it requires all foreign nationals, and that includes non-citizens like green card holders, to register with the federal government, provide biographic details, and carry proof of registration. And in 1940, what that required is that you just went down to your local post office. You said, hi, I'm Katie Spero. I was born in Greece. Here's my details. And then they gave you a little registration card to carry around. Since World War II, this is not something that's really been enforced. It's one of those laws that kind of remains on the books that was not being enforced on a regular basis. There were some limited registrations that happened after 9/11 for kind of specific individuals of certain nationalities who are in the United States, who are men between certain ages, but that was really a very limited kind of one-time interaction. However, under this administration, we have an executive order that was called Protecting the American People Against Invasion. It's Executive Order 14159. And it kind of reinvigorates this Alien Registration Act. So it clarifies who is subject to the registration. Essentially, everybody over 14 years of age who's not a citizen inside the United States. It created an online form to register if you're not currently registered. Many people are automatically registered because if they came into the country with a visa and an I-94 card, or they were issued a green card, they were already registered because of that event. And then it mandates that you do have to carry proof of registration if you're a non-US citizen. So for green card holders, that means your green card. It has to be your physical green card. It cannot be a copy of it. And I know that that makes many green card holders nervous, but you can apply very easily for a replacement card if one gets lost. The same way that you carry your driver's license, you should carry your green card. For non-immigrants, that means the I-94 card that they were issued at the time of entry, or a copy of their non-immigrant visa and their passport. Passports are very difficult to replace for certain individuals. Non-immigrant visas also require you to go back to a US embassy and have that document reissued. So between the two, I recommend an I-94 card. If you're here on deferred action for childhood arrivals, you want to carry your work permit or your deferred action grant. And then if you have a pending case, especially if any of your documents are expired, you want to carry proof of that pending case. Sometimes that proof of your pending case is a proof of delivery. Sometimes it's a receipt. It can look like a very informal document, but you want to make sure you carry that if any of your documents are expired as well. So employees, kind of what can they do to prepare for an ICE raid? And this is something that you may get when you're doing your training as an employer, and people are just like, well, what rights do I have? What can I do if they come and they want to talk to me? One thing you can do is carry a Know Your Rights card. There are cards that are produced. They're called the red card because they are red. You can order them, but you can also print them out for free. And it kind of just allows you to look very clear, like quickly at your rights. And it is something that you could hand to an ICE officer that reminds them that you have the right to remain silent, you do not consent to a search, and you would like to speak with your attorney. You want to carry your US documents, not your country of origin documents. So again, if you are a DACA individual, don't carry your passport, carry your work permit or your deferred action grant. And then as I noted, if you're a non-immigrant, just because of the difficulty of replacing a passport and a visa stamp, I would recommend that you carry your I-94 card. You either want to memorize or carry the telephone number of someone who knows what your employees' individual plans are and can assist with next steps. Just like employers should have a rapid response program, employees should have a rapid response network for themselves if they are subject to being detained and potentially removed from the United States. You want to practice exercising your rights, just the same way that we practice fire drills. And they may want to meet with an immigration lawyer or a nonprofit to review any options that they have if they don't have status inside the United States, or if their status is being terminated under some of the benefit terminations that we're seeing right now. And then, of course, you can always submit a Freedom of Information Act request for your own government records, just to see what the government has, to make sure there are no errors, to make sure that there's and nothing that needs to be corrected in your record. And then employees should make a plan. They need to think about childcare, who's going to pick from school. Do you need to have any type of parent agreements in place with somebody or guardianship agreements drawn up? What are your medications? What are your children's medications? What other types of things do you need to have so that you can be healthy and safe? Make sure that everyone in your family has their passports. You want to memorize emergency contacts if detained. You want people to be able to access your bank account and pay your bills and know where your important documents are. So to Andrea's question, as an employer, can I provide my employees know your rights card, or would that open us up to obstruction? You can inform people of what their rights are. And I know that there has been a fight between Tom Hallman and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about whether or not telling people what their rights are is obstruction. It is not. You can share Know Your Rights cards, you can distribute flyers, you can provide trainings to your employees. All of that is completely lawful. You can shout at people, you have the right to remain silent, and that is completely lawful. And then Candace, I believe you had a question as well.
It's just raising my hand so you could see the question, because I know sometimes when I'm presenting, it's harder to do it at the same time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Yes, I think it would be, so Ginger, I'm sorry, Candace offered to download the red cards in both English and Spanish to email them around. And they're available in a lot of others as well, if that's kind of where your population base is. All right, so our last group of people that are going to be there are bystanders, and bystanders are kind of the great unknown, right? It would be, in 2017, if ICE wanted to do a site visit or a workplace raid, they would show up first thing in the morning. There would be, a guy in a windbreaker and a polo shirt with a judicial warrant. He would come in and he'd say, I need to speak with Katie Spero in the back. And we would go into my office and people would just come and go, would not even know that something was going on. In 2025, raids are really are kind of serving two functions. And one of those functions is to show public activity, because the big goal of ICE right now is to take people into custody and remove them from the United States at much higher levels than they have traditionally done so. Initially, ICE had a nationwide arrest quota of 1,000 individuals. That has been raised to 3,000 individuals per day. It's much easier to get people to remove themselves from the United States without having to do investigation or detention or removal. And so these raids are designed to be kind of high profile so that people, may make the choice to leave the country without intervention. There are going to be people that have a lot of strong feelings about ICE. It's one of those topics right now that people have, people are not very neutral on. And so bystanders may be there who want to intervene in a way that may make the situation worse, or they may want to intervene in a way that kind of brings out larger populations. So knowing what rights bystanders have kind of helps you kind of pre-identify what some of those things might be. So there's a lot of guidance about bystander intervention, and they're organized around the Ds. There's the 5 Ds, the 4 Ds, or the 3 Ds, depending on the situation. I think for immigration, I focus on the 3 Ds. And so these are the things that typically bystanders are going to do. First, they might say something. They may say, you don't have to answer that. You have the right to remain silent. The guidance is that people make short, clear, and firm declarations, that they don't debate, they don't argue, they don't engage with ICE officers. If they're doing that, that's okay. That's not going to lead to obstruction or potentially like raise the temperature on the encounter. But if somebody's starting to argue with the ICE officer, especially if they're getting close physically, that's going to be something that's going to escalate the situation. And so you may want to intervene at that point and say, hey, talk to the person, don't talk to the officer, or kind of help guide them in a way that's going to lower the temperature for you. They may also delegate, which is calling in reinforcements. So you may have someone who comes in and says, hey, ICE just pulled into the parking lot, or there's a bunch of people coming down the street that look like they're ICE officers. You can then just say, thank you for letting me know. We're going to handle it. If you want to check out, let us know. We'll let you leave today. They may be calling in other bystanders. So that's kind of what happened in South Park, right? With Buena Forchetta, people went outside and people in the community started to come over and see what was happening. They may reach out to faith leaders because faith leaders are taking a stronger role in immigration. There's a big faith leader sort of activity that's planned for tomorrow, which is World Refugee Day on June 20th. They're all going to be going in and observing immigration courts. And they are getting more involved with Immigrant Rapid Response, which is the other kind of group that can be called in. Immigrant Rapid Response tends to be very professional, and they actually can organize standers and kind of keep them in a calm area. They may also ask you, do you need me to call anyone? Do you need me to be involved? You can say no, like we've got it under control. And then, of course, bystanders are going to want to typically document. This is 2025. We all live with a phone in our hands, but you want to make sure they're recording responsibly. You need to openly announce that you're recording, and you want to say, I have the right to record. Just be very clear about what you're doing. And I think the officers don't like being recorded, but they're not legally able to stop it. That said, there's no lawyer cheat code for an officer telling you to do something. You can assert your rights, but if an officer wants you to stop recording and it's not safe to record, stop recording. Even though you have the right to do so, your safety and the safety of people around you is paramount. So if that recording is starting to cause the situation to escalate, let somebody know and say, hey, this is causing a problem. As the business owner, I'm asking you to stop. Again, if you are recording as a business owner, you can also say, I've got the recording, thank you. Just make sure that you're looking at the key details, faces, badges, timestamps, and locations. And then remind people that they cannot obstruct these operations. You want to stay back at required, make sure that people are in public areas. Kind of if you are organized and you are telling people, we're handling this situation, we have our protocols in place, please stop yelling, please stop doing this. I think that the crowd can be fairly well controlled. But, getting people out of your business and into the streets typically will help kind of diffuse the situation. When ICE comes in, they are typically still coming in before business hours. That was the case in Buena Forchetta. They came in 30 minutes before opening. But then you have the situation like we had in Omaha with the raid of the meat packing place that was done during business hours. But people aren't visiting a meat packing place the same way that they're visiting a bar or a brewery. At least I hope not, because I don't think the food is quite as good. So some things that you might want to do kind of as bystanders or thinking about what you want to do as a community. You can make your space a welcoming area for immigrants. And really, we want to just focus on having a welcoming, dignified, and a just immigration system. I think that those are things that anyone can agree upon, is that we want to have people who are in this country able to navigate the system and able to have the opportunity to apply. Um, I'm an immigration attorney, and I think people should be deported from this country from time to time. But I want to make sure that that's being done with due process, and I want to make sure that that's being done in accordance with the laws and protections that we have for all people within our borders. You can contact members of Congress and see if they are willing to help provide support. You can join groups that support and promote immigration and work together. And then you can also think about if you want to organize having a rapid response team or taking more significant actions, doing fundraisers for bond hearings or things like that. You certainly are not obligated to. All of us run businesses, and that takes up, 28 hours in a 24-hour day. But there are some things that if you wanted to be more active in saying this is a space where people can gather and be in a community hub, you can. If you do, just be aware of how you want to do that safely and responsibly so that you're making it a good space, both for people who are coming to you as patrons and a safe space for people who are employees as well. So that's everything I had for my presentation today. I just wanted to open it up for some additional questions. And then Candace, I'm going to put the host duties back over to you so that you can do everything else that's needed.
Okay, thank you. So I'm watching the chat to see if there are any questions. Actually, I'm gonna, since I think we have a pretty good crowd, I'm going to, so if anyone would like to ask a question, I'm happy to unmute you. Oh, there we go. Everyone can unmute themselves as they want if anyone wants to verbally ask a question. Otherwise, you can put it in the chat. And so far, not seeing anything. Actually, I guess I'll put my camera back on. Oh, Tanya has a question. Okay.
Just clapping.
Oh, you're clapping. Sorry. The clapping emoji looks a lot like the hand raise emoji. Sorry. Okay. Well, if no one else has any questions, I want to thank Katie for this presentation. It was extremely useful, in my opinion. And we will be putting this up on YouTube if anyone wants to review it, or if you know anyone else who's interested. It may be a couple of days. I don't know what, I'm not the IT editing person, but we'll get it up as soon as we can. If you do, actually, if you want copies of the red card, I literally Googled red card immigration and they came right up. So I'm happy to provide you the ones I downloaded, but they're also pretty easy to grab yourself. And I think that's pretty much it. Katie, thanks again. Great seeing you. We miss you.
Yes, craft beer attorney was absolutely my favorite job. It was a great place to work. Everyone says, what was it like working in beer law? And I was like, it was amazing. And I miss it every day. So thank you again, Candace. Thank you, Tanya. It was nice to see your name. And of course, Shannon, it's been lovely to meet you as well. But thank you everyone for attending today and just taking an interest in kind of how to make your workplaces stronger, kind of prepared for everything. I feel like the last 5 years we've gone through COVID, we've gone through immigration raids, we've gone through, floods in San Diego. Well, we all figure out a way to keep going. So, I appreciate everything that everyone does to make our city and our community a great place.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting unless anyone has anything else. Okay, everyone have a good day, and we're here if you have any questions. So, and I do believe Katie's email address was the last slide of her presentation. So, actually,
yeah,
go ahead.
I'll go ahead and share a copy of the presentation with you as well. So
perfect. And that way, I'll have a copy of the slides. If anyone needs a copy or wants a copy, reach out to me or to Katie, and we'll get you the information you need.
all right.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.